The room you are standing in right now feels heavier than the one you prayed to leave, and that's confusing because you thought obedience would feel lighter. You thought saying yes to God would feel like relief, not resistance. But here you are, carrying pressure you didn't have before, feeling stretched in ways you didn't ask for, wondering why the ground feels unsteady just when you decided to trust Him more. What if the heaviness isn't punishment? What if it's proof that movement is happening? What if the weight you feel is not meant to crush you, but to condition you for the life you're stepping into? Sometimes God doesn't announce new seasons with fireworks. Sometimes He announces them with pressure, with pruning, with the unsettling sense that what used to fit no longer does. And before you dismiss that discomfort, you need to know this. God is not dismantling you to leave you empty. He is making room. The ache, the stretching, the tears you can't quite explain are not signs that you're failing. They are signals that you're transitioning. You're not breaking down, you're breaking through, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. There are moments in life when you wake up and everything feels heavier than it used to. Your responsibilities feel heavier. Your emotions feel heavier. Even your prayers feel heavier. Things that once fit no longer sit right. Conversations that once flowed now feel forced. And spaces that once felt safe now feel tight. You start wondering what you did wrong, why joy feels harder to reach, why peace feels delayed, and why it seems like God has gone quiet right when you need Him to speak the loudest. But what if the weight you're feeling isn't a sign that something is wrong with you, but evidence that something is being formed within you? What if heaviness is not heaven's way of punishing you, but heaven's way of preparing you? We've been taught to equate God's favor with ease, comfort, and clarity. So when things start to feel heavy, we immediately assume we missed a step, made a mistake, or fell out of alignment. But growth has never been light. Birth is heavy, transition is heavy, becoming is heavy, and God has never promised that transformation would be painless, only that it would be purposeful. Sometimes the weight shows up because the old version of you can't carry what the new version of you is about to hold. So the pressure increases not to crush you, but to strengthen you. Heaviness has a way of revealing what convenience concealed. When life was easy, you didn't have to build endurance. When things worked effortlessly, you didn't have to learn how to stand when nothing was holding you up. But now that the weight has increased, muscles you didn't even know you had are starting to activate. Faith that once lived in theory is being demanded in practice. Trust that once sounded good in conversation is now being required in real time. And it feels heavy because you're lifting something you've never lifted before. God often allows weight to enter your life when He's increasing your capacity. You're not carrying more because you're failing. You're carrying more because you're growing. The pressure is evidence that heaven believes you can handle what's coming, even if you don't feel ready yet. Preparation rarely announces itself as favor. Most of the time it shows up as discomfort, stretching, and holy disruption. The weight isn't random, it's strategic. Sometimes the heaviness is emotional. You feel misunderstood, unseen, or stretched thin by people who don't recognize the season you're in. Sometimes it's spiritual. Your prayers feel deeper, more desperate, less polished. Sometimes it's mental. Your mind is processing endings that haven't fully happened yet, because before God moves you into a new life, He allows you to feel the gravity of leaving the old one behind. Even good things feel heavy when it's time to release them. And here's the part we don't like to admit. We ask God for more, but we resist the weight that comes with it. We pray for purpose, but we complain when responsibility increases. We ask for elevation, but resent the pressure that comes with climbing. But weight is often the language God uses to communicate that promotion is near. Not every heavy season is an attack. Some heavy seasons are invitations to mature. The weight you're feeling is shaping your posture. It's teaching you how to lean into God instead of relying on what used to work. It's exposing coping mechanisms that won't survive the next level. It's forcing you to slow down long enough to listen, long enough to heal, long enough to confront the parts of yourself you could ignore when life was lighter. And while it feels overwhelming, it is also deeply intentional. Preparation doesn't feel holy while it's happening. It feels inconvenient. It feels lonely. It feels like you're carrying more than everyone else and wondering why God would trust you with this kind of weight. But heaven doesn't place weight where there is no strength to sustain it. The pressure didn't show up to destroy you. It showed up because what's ahead of you requires stability, depth, and endurance, and those things are only built under load. So if everything feels heavy right now, it may not be because you're behind, broken, or forgotten. It may be because you are being reinforced for what's next, strengthened for a life that demands more courage, more faith, more resilience, and more trust than the one you're leaving behind. And the weight you feel today is quietly preparing you to stand tomorrow under blessings that would have crushed the version of you used to be. There are seasons when God doesn't announce change with open doors, fresh starts, or clear instructions. Sometimes the first sign that He's moving you forward is discomfort. The things you once tolerated begin to irritate you. The routines that once kept you comfortable start to feel draining. The environments that once felt familiar begin to feel restrictive. And you can't quite explain it because on paper everything still looks fine. Nothing is technically wrong, but nothing feels right either. That tension is not confusion, it's transition. God often moves us forward by allowing the old life to lose its ease. We like progress when it feels exciting, but we resist it when it feels inconvenient. We pray for new levels, new purpose, new direction, but we expect God to escort us there gently, without disturbing what we've grown attached to. But attachment can become an anchor, it can quietly become a cage. So God, in His wisdom, doesn't always remove you from places that no longer serve you. Sometimes He simply removes the comfort from them. What used to feel safe starts to feel suffocating. What used to bring joy now feels like obligation. And that discomfort is not cruelty, it's clarity. God knows that if the old life continues to feel good, you'll stay longer than you should. You'll settle where you were meant to pass through. You'll cling to familiarity even when it no longer fits who you're becoming. So He allows the friction. He lets the edges rub. He allows the restlessness to grow. Because discomfort has a way of doing what logic can't. It pushes you to move when comfort would convince you to remain. There are moments when you think something external has changed, but the truth is you have changed. You've grown, matured, deepened. Your capacity has expanded. Your discernment has sharpened, and your spirit is no longer satisfied with shallow spaces. But instead of immediately giving you something new, God allows you to feel how outgrown the old has become. The clothes don't fit anymore, not because they shrank, but because you grew. And growth always exposes misalignment. This is why the old life starts to feel heavy, loud, and draining. Conversations feel repetitive. Patterns feel exhausting. You start asking questions you never asked before. You begin craving depth where you once accepted surface. And suddenly, you're uncomfortable in rooms you prayed to enter. That discomfort isn't ingratitude. It's evidence that God is shifting your appetite. He's teaching you to hunger for more than what once sustained you. God doesn't drag us into new seasons against our will. He leads us by making staying harder than leaving. He disrupts our peace with the familiar, so we'll pursue alignment with the unknown. And it's frustrating because you wish He would just tell you what's next instead of making what is feel unbearable. But faith is often built in the space between dissatisfaction and direction. That space teaches you to trust God without clarity, to obey without a full map, to move without guarantees. Sometimes the discomfort shows up in relationships. You start feeling misunderstood or emotionally distant from people who once knew you well. It's not that love is gone, it's that alignment has shifted. Sometimes it shows up in habits. Things you used to enjoy no longer satisfy you. Sometimes it shows up spiritually. You feel a holy unrest, a sense that there's more, even if you don't know what more looks like yet. That unrest is God loosening your grip on what can't go with you. The danger is misinterpreting discomfort as failure. You assume something is wrong with you because you're no longer content. But contentment isn't always a virtue when God is calling you to move. Sometimes dissatisfaction is divine. Sometimes frustration is instruction. Sometimes God uses discomfort as a megaphone to get your attention when whispers no longer work. If God made the old life comfortable while calling you into a new one, you'd keep postponing obedience. you'd say later. When he's saying now, you'd negotiate your growth instead of surrendering to it. So he allows the tension. He lets the old wineskin stretch until it can no longer contain what he's pouring out, not to punish you, but to protect what's coming. This is why everything feels awkward right now. You don't fit where you used to, but you haven't fully arrived where you're going. You're between versions, between seasons, between identities. And in that between, God is teaching you how to release without resentment, how to trust without certainty, how to move without needing validation from people who only knew the previous version of you. Discomfort is not a sign that God has abandoned you. It's often a sign that he's leading you. He's teaching you to listen to holy dissatisfaction instead of silencing it. He's teaching you that just because something is familiar doesn't mean it's a sign to your future. And as uncomfortable as it feels, this disruption is doing something important. It's breaking your dependence on what's ending so you can develop a deeper dependence on the one who is guiding you forward. Heavy seasons have a way of revealing parts of you that ease never required. When life was manageable, you could move on autopilot. You could rely on routines, familiarity, and momentum. But when the weight increases, autopilot shuts down. You can't coast through pressure. You can't fake strength when resistance demands authenticity. Heavy seasons strip away shortcuts and expose what you're actually made of. There is strength hidden inside of you that only pressure can uncover. Not because God enjoys watching you struggle, but because some capacity can only be activated when it's required. You never discover how deep your faith is until shallow trust is no longer enough. You never realize how resilient you are until quitting feels like the most logical option. And you never understand the power of your voice until silence starts costing you too much. The heaviness forces you to show up differently. You pray differently. You think differently. You move with more intention. What once felt optional becomes essential. You learn how to breathe through stress, how to keep going when motivation runs out, how to stand when there is no applause and no reassurance. Strength that remains dormant in comfort becomes visible in resistance. What feels like breaking is often strengthening. Muscles don't grow because they are used gently. They grow because they are stressed, stretched, and torn before being rebuilt. The same is true spiritually and emotionally. God allows pressure not to weaken you, but to condition you. He allows weight not to crush you, but to train you. And even though it feels overwhelming, something inside of you is rising to meet the demand. Heavy seasons expose the lies you believed about yourself. You thought you couldn't handle rejection, but here you are still standing. You thought you would fall apart if things didn't work out, but you adapted. You thought you needed validation to survive, but you learned how to keep moving even when no one claps. The weight reveals that you are stronger than the narrative you've been telling yourself. Sometimes the strength that emerges doesn't look loud or impressive. It looks like endurance. It looks like waking up again when you're tired. It looks like choosing integrity when compromise would be easier. It looks like continuing to love even when you feel unseen. It looks like staying faithful when quitting would give immediate relief. Heavy seasons don't always produce dramatic breakthroughs. Sometimes they produce quiet stamina. The pressure also exposes weak spots that need healing. Heavy seasons don't just reveal strength, they reveal areas that still need support. Triggers surface, old wounds ache, unresolved fears rise to the surface. But this exposure isn't meant to shame you, it's meant to heal you. You can't strengthen what you refuse to acknowledge. And God uses the weight to bring hidden fractures into the light so they can finally be repaired. There are moments in heavy seasons when you surprise yourself. You respond with wisdom where you once reacted emotionally. You set boundaries you were once afraid to enforce. You speak truth instead of shrinking. You rest without guilt. These moments may seem small, but they are evidence that something inside of you has changed. Strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply shows up when needed. Heavy seasons also teach you how to depend on God instead of your own endurance. They push you beyond self-sufficiency into surrender. You realize that your strength alone isn't enough, And that realization doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise. Because the strongest version of you is not the one who carries everything alone, but the one who knows when to lean. There is a maturity that only comes from carrying weight with grace. Anyone can be joyful when life is light, but it takes depth to remain grounded under pressure. It takes spiritual muscle to stay soft in hard seasons. It takes real strength to resist bitterness when disappointment feels justified. Heavy seasons refine your character not by removing difficulty, but by shaping how you respond to it. You may not recognize yourself right now, and that can be unsettling. You feel different because you are different. The strength emerging in you is unfamiliar because you've never had to use it before. But that doesn't mean it's unnatural. It means it was dormant, waiting for a season that would call it forth. And even though the wait feels relentless, it is revealing that you are capable of far more than you imagined. Strength that is revealed under pressure is strength that lasts. It's not dependent on circumstances. It's not fueled by comfort. It's anchored in conviction, faith, and resilience that cannot be shaken easily. And while you didn't ask for the heaviness, you are becoming someone who can carry more, withstand more, and walk forward with a steadiness that could only be forged in this kind of season. There is a strange pattern that repeats itself in the lives of those who are on the edge of transformation. Just when you feel like you can't take one more delay, one more obstacle, one more no, resistance intensifies. Doors that were already heavy feel impossible to push. Opposition becomes louder. Doubt grows bolder. And it feels unfair because you've already endured so much. But resistance has a way of surfacing when something valuable is about to be released. Resistance is often the signal that you are closer than you think. It doesn't show up to discourage beginners. It shows up when momentum has started. It shows up when growth is happening. It shows up when movement is real. If nothing was changing, there would be nothing to resist. The pushback you're experiencing is not random, it's reactive. Right before breakthrough, everything that benefits from you staying the same begins to protest. Old patterns resist change. Fear resists freedom. Insecurity resists confidence. Even familiar people and environments can unknowingly resist your growth. Not because they are malicious, but because your evolution disrupts their expectations. Resistance is rarely personal, but it always feels personal. Sometimes the resistance comes internally. You battle hesitation, self-doubt, and the urge to retreat into what feels safer. You question whether you heard God correctly. You replay past failures. You shrink your vision to avoid disappointment. This internal resistance can be more exhausting than any external obstacle because it sounds like your own voice. But just because a thought is familiar doesn't mean it's true. External resistance can look like closed doors, delays, criticism, or unexpected challenges. You do everything right and still face obstacles. You prepare, pray, and plan, and yet progress feels slow. This is often where people give up, assuming resistance means stop. But many times resistance means continue. The enemy of progress isn't always opposition. Sometimes it's misinterpretation. Resistance tests your commitment. It asks whether you are serious about what you said you wanted. It exposes whether your faith is conditional or rooted. When things go smoothly, obedience is easy, but when resistance shows up, obedience requires conviction. This is where growth becomes real, because you're no longer moving based on feelings, but on belief. There is a refining that happens in resistance. Your motives get clearer. Your distractions fall away. You learn how to prioritize what matters most. Resistance forces you to choose between comfort and calling. And every time you choose to press forward, something inside of you strengthens. Not all resistance is meant to be removed. Some resistance is meant to be resisted. It builds spiritual endurance. It sharpens discernment. It teaches you how to stand firm instead of constantly searching for escape routes. Without resistance, you wouldn't develop the muscle to sustain what's coming next. Release often requires pressure. Diamonds don't surface without it. Oil doesn't flow without crushing. New life doesn't emerge without labor. These processes are not punishment, they are preparation. Resistance doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Often it means you're doing something significant. You may notice that resistance increases right when you make a decision to change. The moment you commit to growth, old temptations reappear, old fears resurface, old voices try to pull you back. This is not coincidence. It's confirmation that your decision carries weight. The danger is mistaking resistance for rejection. Rejection tells you to stop. Resistance challenges you to grow. Rejection closes doors permanently. Resistance invites you to push differently, pray deeper, and trust more fully. Learning the difference changes how you respond. There is also a timing element to resistance. It intensifies when release is near because whatever has benefited from delay senses loss, so it fights harder. The closer you get, the louder the opposition becomes. But loud opposition does not mean greater power. It often means desperation. If you look back over your life, you'll likely see this pattern. The hardest battles came right before the biggest shifts. The most discouraging moments preceded the most defining breakthroughs. What felt like the end was actually the threshold. Resistance is not proof that God is absent. It's often proof that He is active. He is building perseverance, courage, and faith that can withstand the weight of what's coming. Because release without readiness becomes overwhelming. Resistance prepares you to receive without collapsing under the blessing. So when resistance rises, it doesn't always mean retreat. Sometimes it means brace yourself, anchor your faith, adjust your grip, and keep moving forward, not because it's easy, but because something on the other side of this resistance is worth the fight. Pressure has a way of making us assume something is wrong. When life begins to press in on every side, our instinct is to look for an escape, a reason, or someone to blame. We tell ourselves that if we were in God's will, things wouldn't feel so tight, but alignment rarely feels spacious at first. Often it feels restrictive, uncomfortable, and demanding. What feels like pressure is not God pushing you out of place. It is God pulling you into position. Alignment requires adjustment. And adjustment always creates pressure. When something is out of place, there is no resistance. But when it is being shifted into its proper position, tension appears. God applies pressure not to harm you, but to align you with purpose, with timing, and with destiny that requires precision. Loose things don't carry weight well. Misaligned things break under load. Pressure ensures stability. The pressure you feel is evidence that God is arranging things with intention. He is refining your posture, your priorities, and your perspective. He is pressing out what doesn't belong and strengthening what does. This is why the season feels demanding. You're being realigned for what's ahead, and realignment is rarely comfortable. Pressure exposes where adjustments are needed. It reveals habits that no longer serve you. It brings awareness to relationships that are misaligned. It challenges patterns that once felt harmless but now hinder growth. Without pressure, misalignment goes unnoticed. But pressure forces clarity. We often resist pressure because it disrupts our sense of control. It requires us to release what we can't manage and trust what we can't see. But alignment always demands surrender. You cannot stay in control and be perfectly aligned at the same time. Pressure teaches you how to yield without losing yourself. Sometimes the pressure is internal. You feel stretched emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You're questioning things you once accepted. You're uncomfortable with compromise you once tolerated. That internal pressure is alignment happening on the inside before it shows up on the outside. God adjusts your heart before He adjusts your circumstances. Other times the pressure is external. Expectations increase, responsibilities multiply, situations demand more from you than before, and you wonder why everything feels heavier at once. But God does not align in pieces. He aligns holistically. When He prepares you for what's next, everything shifts together. Pressure also refines your focus. When things get tight, distractions fall away. You stop wasting energy on what doesn't matter. You become intentional about where you invest your time, your voice, and your strength. Pressure clarifies purpose. Alignment is not about perfection. It's about positioning. It's about being in the right place at the right time with the right posture. Pressure helps correct what's off by degrees you can't see. Small misalignments can cause major damage later. So God corrects now to protect later. This is why pressure often shows up before expansion. Before something can grow, it must be stabilized. Before something can carry more, it must be reinforced. Pressure strengthens the framework so expansion doesn't lead to collapse. God is more concerned with your sustainability than your speed. The pressure may feel relentless, but it is purposeful. It is shaping you into someone who can carry what you've been praying for. Without alignment, blessings become burdens, opportunities become overwhelming, visibility becomes exposure. Pressure prepares you to receive without being undone. There is also a humility that pressure produces. It reminds you that you need God at every stage, not just at the beginning. It strips away self-reliance and replaces it with dependence. And that dependence keeps you aligned long after the pressure eases. When you stop fighting the pressure and start asking what it's aligning, your perspective shifts. You move from frustration to awareness, from resistance to cooperation, from fear to trust. You realize that the pressure is not your enemy, it's your guide. Alignment doesn't feel gentle while it's happening. It feels demanding because it matters. God is not careless with your future. He is intentional about where you stand, how you stand, and what you stand on. And the pressure you feel right now is evidence that He is positioning you carefully for a life that requires precision, strength, and stability. Pain has a way of making us question purpose. When something hurts deeply, our first instinct is to ask why God would allow it, why it had to happen this way, and why it had to happen to us. We assume pain means something went wrong, that something slipped past God's attention, or that we are paying for a mistake. But God has never been careless with your story. He doesn't waste pain. He repurposes it. There are experiences you never would have chosen, seasons you never prayed for, losses you never anticipated, and yet God allowed them to touch your life, not because He delights in suffering, but because He sees further than the moment you're in. Pain becomes raw material in His hands. What wounds you becomes wisdom. What breaks you becomes a bridge for someone else. What nearly took you out becomes the very thing that gives you authority. God repurposes pain by changing its assignment. What the enemy intended to silence you becomes the source of your voice. What was meant to harden your heart becomes the place where compassion is born. Pain that is processed in God's presence doesn't disappear, but it transforms. It stops controlling you and starts instructing you. There are things you understand now that you could not have learned any other way. Empathy that didn't come from theory but from experience. Discernment that was sharpened through disappointment. Strength that came from surviving what you thought would destroy you. Pain taught you how to pray differently, how to love more intentionally, how to listen more carefully. That growth didn't come despite the pain, it came through it. God repurposes pain by using it to prune. Some connections only loosen when pain exposes their limits. Some habits only break when pain interrupts the cycle. Some identities only shift when pain forces you to confront who you've been pretending to be. Pain clears space for transformation by removing what comfort allowed to remain. Pain also brings clarity. It has a way of stripping life down to what truly matters. When things hurt, you stop performing, you stop pretending, you stop living for appearances. Pain demands honesty, and in that honesty, God does some of His deepest work. He meets you in the raw places, not to shame you, but to heal you. There is a strength that comes from surviving pain with God that cannot be replicated. You learn how to endure without becoming bitter. You learn how to forgive without minimizing what hurt you. You learn how to keep your heart open even when it's been bruised. That kind of maturity doesn't come from easy seasons. It comes from allowing God to walk you through pain instead of numbing it or running from it. God also repurposes pain by making it prophetic. Your story becomes a sign that survival is possible. Your healing becomes evidence that restoration is real. You don't just speak hope, you embody it. And when you speak, people listen differently because they can tell you've been there. Pain gives credibility to your faith. What you went through was not random. The timing wasn't accidental. The depth wasn't excessive. God knew exactly how much you could carry and exactly what it would produce. Even the pain that came from other people's choices did not disqualify you from purpose. God is skilled at bringing beauty out of broken decisions, even when they weren't yours. Pain reshapes how you see God. You learn that He is not just a God of blessings, but a God of presence. He doesn't always remove the pain immediately, but he never leaves you alone in it, and that nearness changes you. You stop chasing shallow faith and start building something real. Sometimes God repurposes pain by slowing you down. He uses it to interrupt paths that would have led to burnout, pride, or destruction. He uses it to redirect you when you were moving too fast or too far in the wrong direction. What felt like a setback was actually protection. Pain also builds capacity. You can hold space for others now because you know what it feels like to be in need of grace. You don't rush people through their healing because you know healing takes